Eric Clapton, the legendary blues rock icon whose guitar riffs have shaped generations, has always been the one that guitarists look up to. But even Clapton, a musician who's been called God in the guitar world, has his own heroes. Now, at 79, he's finally shared the name of the guitarist who inspired him the most, leaving fans stunned. Who could be Clapton's ultimate favorite? Was it a rock legend, a blues master, or someone completely unexpected? This revelation goes deep into Clapton's roots, his influences, and his view on the musicians who shaped rock and blues history. Clapton was born on March 30th, 1945, in the little village of Ripley, Surrey, England. His mom, Patricia Molly Clapton, was just 16 back then. The guy who fathered him, Edward Friar, was a young soldier from Canada, drafted into World War II before Clapton was even born. Not long after, Friar went back to Canada, and just like that, Clapton's dad became more of a story than a natural person for him. It felt like young Eric's life was already written in shadows before he knew his name. Growing up, he thought his grandma, Rose, and her husband, Jack Clapp, were his parents. At the same time, his mom, Patricia, was simply his older sister. It seemed more accessible for everyone. Maybe it was meant to protect him. But as he got older, a nagging feeling started to creep in, especially when he noticed the little sad glances his sister would throw his way. Eventually, he found out the truth, and it broke him. It wasn't just that his mother was his mother. He had been carrying the burden of a stranger's absence his whole life. When Patricia remarried and moved to Germany, leaving Clapton behind, it felt like the door had slammed shut on the only idea of family he'd ever known. She had a new life and new people. But Clapton stayed in Surrey, holding on to the silence that wrapped around him like an old, worn blanket. In that quiet, he discovered music. At 13, Clapton got an acoustic guitar, a German-made Hoyer. For a boy with little patience and many distractions, the guitar's rough steel strings felt more like a punishment than a gift. But something inside him kept getting back to it, maybe out of sheer curiosity, or perhaps because it was the one thing in his life that never changed. He'd spend hours strumming along to old blues records, repeating the chords repeatedly. Clapton didn't just want to play. He wanted to sound like the voices that filled those records, voices that talked about pain, longing, and the endless reach for something just out of reach. He'd play and listen, listening until the rough edges smoothed out, until the sound was just right. By 16, Clapton's playing had gotten enough attention to land him a few small gigs. His talent had become an open secret among the musicians in Surrey. He'd busk in the streets, moving from Kingston to Richmond, just a young guy with a guitar and a heart full of blues. Then, in 1963, a friend named Dave Brock, another blues lover, asked him to play in a small pub, marking the first time Clapton's sound finally found its place. Not long after, Clapton joined his first band, the Roosters. It was simple, no frills. But for the first time, Clapton felt he was part of something. I don't know if this is the right path, but maybe it's one step closer, he might have thought, tuning his guitar one quiet night, feeling the warmth of belonging, however small it was. By October 1963, he'd joined the Yardbirds, but when the band started to lean towards pop, Clapton got uneasy. His heart was elsewhere, lost in the raw power of blues, where every note spoke a language he understood all too well. "This isn't who I am," he might have told himself, his voice filled with regret. So when the band's hit song For Your Love blew up, Clapton did something that not many would dare. He walked away. He kept moving, joining John Mayall's Blues Breakers, and becoming someone audiences whispered about. People began calling him God, after a fan painted Clapton is God on a wall in Islington. Eric would shake his head at the nickname, uncomfortable with all the praise. It was like he could feel the pressure exerted by every hand he hadn't shaken, every answer he hadn't received, the truth he'd never fully dealt with. Eric Clapton's journey to stardom, especially during his days with Cream and Blind Faith, combines inspiring highs and challenging struggles. Clapton, who was just another name in the pubs of London, ended up alongside musical icons like Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce in Cream. Even as they rocked out in the UK and then across the US, Eric felt like everything in his life was racing ahead of him. Yeah, fame was on the rise, but so were tensions and conflicts in the band. Is this it? Clapton would sometimes wonder, doubts creeping in under all the applause. With Cream's success came an unexpected competitor. Just when Clapton was solidifying his spot as Britain's top guitarist, Jimi Hendrix made a splash, shining his psychedelic vibes across the rock scene. When Hendrix appeared at one of Cream's early gigs and jumped in to play a wild version of Killing Floor, Clapton was utterly blown away. How could someone play like that? He looked up to Hendrix, but couldn't help but feel anxious. What if he was losing his edge? Friends like Pete Townshend and Beatles members watched in wonder while Clapton pushed himself, caught between being amazed by Hendrix's energy and worried about what it meant for him. But Cream was more than just competition or worries. Their journey took them to America's stages for the first time. Eric held his iconic painted Gibson SG, the psychedelic Fool. Together, they lit up crowds with hits like Sunshine of Your Love and Crossroads. Clapton was also discovering his voice, not just as a guitarist, but as a singer and songwriter. Yet even these happy moments couldn't hide the issues brewing inside Cream, which were covered by loud solos and roaring applause. He often glanced at Bruce and Baker, questioning how long they could keep this shaky balance. In 1968, after Cream's final tour and dealing with harsh reviews from American critics and band tensions, Clapton realized he needed a fresh start. The split from Cream was messy, but oddly, it felt freeing. Soon enough, he teamed up with Ginger Baker again, bringing in Steve Winwood and Rick Gretsch to form Blind Faith. Their debut show in London's Hyde Park attracted 100,000 fans, but even with all the cheers, doubts were still nagging him. Clapton drained from his Cream days and couldn't shake the feeling that this was another rush, that Blind Faith was moving too fast to stand firm. "Are we heading somewhere, or are we already wandering?" he pondered. But he kept his thoughts to himself. Not long after that, Clapton got pulled into the music of Delaney and Bonnie, who felt more down-to-earth and relatable. They weren't rock giants. They were people who brought his weariness and his need to reconnect with music. He jumped on tour with them as another musician, putting fame on hold. Delaney pushed him to take the lead, sing, and find himself. With their encouragement, he finally recorded his first solo album. The songs were more mellow and straightforward, giving him a moment to breathe. Eric Clapton's time with Derek and the Dominoes wasn't just about making music. A messy, heartfelt saga of pain, searching, and passion brought a man to his knees. Clapton, eager to escape the oppressive spotlight and be part of a band, got together with some musicians who valued heart over showmanship. His pals from Delaney and Bonnie's band, Bobby Whitlock on keys, Carl Rattle on bass, and Jim Gordon on drums, teamed up with Clapton to create songs that resonated with the broken parts of his soul. Clapton's aim was simple: to set aside his ego and make music for the joy of it. "I just wanted to play music, not show off. Let the songs talk, not me," he once shared with a close buddy. Inspired by the band's focus on the craft of songwriting instead of flashy guitar solos, Clapton hoped to bring attention back to melody and feeling. He told a friend, "It's time for the guitar to be the quiet guy, just adding to the song." Soon enough, the band discovered their sound, accidentally stumbling upon their name when someone misread their temporary title. Del and the Dynamos as Derek and the Dominoes, and just like that, the name stuck. But while they were playing, something darker stirred beneath the surface. Clapton had become close to George Harrison, his friend and fellow musician. However, he was also secretly in love with Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd. This painful, unspoken crush began eating away at him, becoming a deep ache that needed to come out. When Boyd rejected him, Clapton felt heartbroken and couldn't shake off the hopeless love. From that pain emerged the music for Layla and other assorted love songs. Clapton poured his heart into every note, his emotions flowing like unsent letters. His longing was apparent in Layla, the tale of a man hopelessly in love with someone he could never have. During those intense recording sessions at Criteria Studios in Miami, fate brought Clapton together with guitarist Duane Allman. The two formed a friendship that infused Duane's slide guitar into the Dominoes' sound, adding the haunting, memorable edge that would forever characterize Layla. Duane's slide riffs intertwined with Clapton's guitar, like two voices engaged in a desperate dialogue. The album began to take form, with tracks like Tell the Truth and Why Does Love Got to Be So Sad, strongly impacting the pain that often comes with love. But just when Clapton started feeling close to Allman, as the brother he'd always wished for, tragedy struck again. News broke of Jimi Hendrix's death in the middle of their recording sessions, leaving Clapton devastated, especially since he had just bought a guitar to be a birthday present for Hendrix. Soon after, Duane Allman would lose his life in a motorcycle accident, taking away Clapton's newfound brother in music. The Dominoes pressed on, but Layla didn't get the recognition Clapton had been hoping for, and he felt the sting of disappointment. The band struggled through a US tour, losing friends and broken hearts. Even Clapton couldn't keep it together. Drugs and alcohol haunted him like old memories. "I'd drown myself in the bottle, looking for a way out," he later confessed. But it was hardly a way out at all. The Dominoes fell apart not long after, with tempers and egos tearing them apart, leaving Clapton isolated and sinking into the fog of addiction. He retreated to his home, battling a heroin habit that nearly took his life, performing only at George Harrison's concert for Bangladesh. That night, I could barely stand, he later remembered, fainting, feeling like I was already halfway gone. In January 1973, it was Pete Townshend who rescued Clapton from the depths, organizing the Rainbow Concert to help Clapton recover and break free from heroin. Clapton took the stage, battered and bruised, but with a spark of hope. Eventually, he got sober, found love with Boyd, and started living again. However, his battles with addiction were far from over. At 79, Eric Clapton finally revealed his favorite guitarist. Eric Clapton's life has had a lot of ups and downs, but there's been plenty of shine in it, too. Few musicians made such a lasting impact on music, and even fewer have a legacy that weighs heavy like Clapton's. He stepped into the limelight in the 60s and 70s, breathing life into Britain's blues and rock scenes and beyond. People started scribbling, "Clapton is God," on walls in London, capturing the heartbeat of a generation that hung on every note he strummed. But for Clapton, greatness meant something different. Amid all the accolades and pressure, he quietly admired others who had made a deep impression. He'd say guitarists changed his life forever. There was always one he held above the rest, but he wasn't the only one who felt that way. Again and again, he'd say he wasn't the greatest. Clapton had his list of guitarists who played with the soul and fire he loved, turning every chord into something meaningful. And maybe none shines more brightly in his eyes than Jimi Hendrix. When they got to know each other, Clapton saw Hendrix as a fellow musician and a friend with a touch of wild magic. In 1966, Clapton, already well known, invited Hendrix to join him on stage with his band Cream. Hendrix was new to London, but whispers of his talent had already floated over from America. That night, the rumors were set aflame. Hendrix played like the guitar was a part of him, his fingers moving confidently and efficiently, glowing everyone away. A journalist from back then, Keith Altham, would later remember catching Clapton backstage, cigarette in hand, looking visibly shaken. "You never told me he was that good," Clapton had mumbled to Chas Chandler, who managed Hendrix. Over time, their paths crossed more often. Admiration turned into friendship. Hendrix shared Clapton's love for the blues, something they both felt in a way that few others could. But then, just like that, Hendrix was gone. One night in September 1970, Clapton was meant to meet Hendrix at a Rolling Stones concert. He had even bought him a left-handed Stratocaster, a rare find he was excited to give his friend. That guitar stayed with Clapton the entire night. He could see Hendrix across the venue, but fate kept them apart. When morning came, so did the news. Clapton was left holding that Strat, a gift that would never reach its intended hands. Hendrix was gone, and Clapton could only look back, wishing he had somehow stayed closer and seen him more. It was a grief Clapton carried quietly, a void that had never entirely been filled. But Clapton's heart was open to new faces, and soon he felt that awe washes over him again. Driving one day, he heard a voice on the radio that stopped him dead in his tracks. The guitar cried out, sounding hauntingly familiar, yet fresh, like the notes were telling a story. He pulled over, his mind racing with one question. Who on earth is this? The name Stevie Ray Vaughan would stick with him, and he chased that answer. Vaughan's playing felt endless, like a faucet of pure sound and feeling that never hesitated or faltered. For Clapton, that was something special. Most players, himself included, would pause or sometimes lose track, searching for something new. But Vaughan never seemed to rhythm. He never missed a beat. Clapton wondered how Vaughan could play non-stop, as if the music flowed through him. It was an openness, a kind of channeling that captivated Clapton and made Vaughan one of the few he'd talk about with such admiration. Then there was Duane Allman. Clapton was captivated by Allman's work with Wilson Pickett on Hey Jude. The guitar riffs struck with a power that stayed with Clapton long after he first heard them. He still remembers how he couldn't stop picking up the phone to find out who this fantastic guitarist was. Allman had something rare, a mix of raw, soulful energy and grace that only he seemed to know how to handle. Clapton invited Allman to work on the Layla album. In those studio sessions, a friendship bloomed, woven together by the strings they both loved so much. Allman even had an open invite to join Clapton's band, Derek and the Dominoes, even though he eventually chose his path with the Allman Brothers Band. It was another loss Clapton quietly held. Still, Clapton's respect for his peers went far and wide, reaching back to the very roots of rock. Chuck Berry was always one of the first names he'd mention when discussing influences. Berry's style was the roadmap for rock guitar, something Clapton understood deeply. It was a gritty, joyful style that shaped early rock and roll, and Clapton never forgot it. Whenever he'd try to play something upbeat, his fingers naturally returned to the style Berry had brought to life. Clapton once said that if you wanted to play rock guitar, you'd eventually sound like Berry, because that was the heart of it. There's just no other way to play that music, Clapton would say, with a respect that needed no further explanation. And while it might surprise some, Clapton's admiration also extended to a younger generation. John Mayer, who often got the pop heartthrob, had a musicality that Clapton couldn't ignore. Mayer joined Clapton on the tribute album, The Breeze, honoring the legendary songwriter J.J. Cale. Clapton hadn't known much about Mayer's deep admiration for Cale. Still, when they played together, he saw Mayer's talent in a new light. Mayer moved through his takes with an effortless grace, usually nailing each one by the second try, and Clapton was impressed. He respected Meyer's humility and his dedication to the craft. He saw a bright future in him that went beyond just fame. And of course, there was Jeff Beck. A fellow Brit, Beck's name was like a sacred chant among guitarists of that time. Beck's focus was fierce. He was either playing guitar or working on his beloved cars. Clapton admired that consistency, that singular purpose he struggled to keep. Reflecting on himself, Clapton would often say that Beck had remained faithful, never swayed by the distractions of fame. Clapton's journey wasn't without its twists, even among his closest friends. George Harrison was one of them. Their friendship meant more than just music, though it sometimes strained under personal complications. Harrison, a Beatle, often got overlooked as a guitarist, but Clapton saw the depth in Harrison and the struggles he faced trying to escape the shadow of the Fab Four. The two even found themselves in a weird love triangle, both enchanted by Pattie Boyd. Despite the complicated relationships, they stayed close, united by a shared understanding of their pressures and passion for music. Back in Clapton's early days, John Mayall had shaped him majorly. It was with Mayall's Blues Breakers that Clapton's talent blossomed. Mayall didn't just mentor him, he believed in Clapton's skills, giving him the courage to find his sound. Clapton would later say those were some of his proudest moments, playing alongside someone who got him and knew how to bring out the best in him. There was one more name Clapton cherished above all others, a quiet and steady presence. Albert Lee was someone Clapton would eventually name the greatest guitarist he'd ever known. Lee's mastery lay in his restraint, in how he could make even the fastest licks seem like a breeze. Clapton was in awe of Lee's ability, how he could play anything with a natural grace that few had. For Clapton, Lee's playing was pure beauty, something he spoke about with the highest regard. Last but not least, Clapton may have been labeled to be a star, but for him, these guitarists, the friends, the inspirations, the ones who left too soon, were the true heart of music. They were the ones he held dear and would never forget. Have you ever met someone who respects the friendship bond like Eric? Share your experiences in the comment section and subscribe to the channel to watch the upcoming videos.